Take it away, Matthew Berry. Who do you love this weekend?
Well, so I'm a big fan of Josh Allen this weekend. And you're like, really, Josh Allen? Well, by the way, Josh Allen is QB 19 on the year. Josh Allen's been bad fantasy-wise. And I think people are concerned because he hasn't been getting the goal line rushes, which is what he got last year. Zach Moss vultured 2 on this past weekend. But listen, he had one that he was down at the 1-yard line. It's going to happen. And by the way, the Washington football team, we thought this was going to be a good defense. It's not a good defense. It's been bad for 2 straight. Let Daniel Jones throw all over it. So I have Josh Allen as a top 5 play today. Patience with Josh Allen. I love Jalen Hurts. We've talked about him multiple times on this show. And Daniel Jones. Speaking of Daniel Jones, I have Daniel Jones as a top 10 play this week against the Falcons. What's exciting for me, Greeny, is how they are using designed runs for Daniel Jones. They're these aren't just scrambles that happen to go for it is a part of their offense now. He is much faster than I think anyone gave him credit for coming out of college, and it's a big part of his game. And as we talk about in fantasy, having that rushing ability at a quarterback position just gives you a high floor. Whether it's Jalen Hurts, who had a bad game last week but was still a top 10 fantasy quarterback because he ran so much.
That's a really interesting one to me. Let's stick on Daniel Jones for a minute. Hurts is going up against the Cowboy defense on Monday night, so that's just a great game in a million different ways. The Giants, who are playing Atlanta, I had Steve Young on the TV show in July of this year and asked him about Daniel Jones. And that was what he said to me. He said that team needs to do a better job, that offense needs to do a better job of his ability to run with the football. And what you're telling everybody who's not watching them play their first 2 games is that's what they're doing.
1,000%. Listen, we talked about him coming out of college, that he was a guy that, when he was at Duke, he averaged 20, 30 yards a game. He was, again, more mobile than he gets credit for, I think, but it was just they didn't ever use it as part of the offense. And finally, you've seen in the first 2 games that they are doing bootlegs, they are doing design runs, they're doing RPOs, they're doing things to get Jones in space. And you think about, listen, I get it. They got a lot of pub from him and Galladay yelling at each other. But if you think about that offense, so they have Saquon, and he'll be back to 100% soon. They add Kenny Galladay, who's somebody that the defense has to pay attention to, even though the numbers haven't been there. They have to pay attention to Kenny Galladay. Sterling Shepard has been very productive so far this year. They're probably going to get Evan Ingram back this week. Darius Slayton is a speedster. I know he had the bad drop on Thursday night, but Darius Slayton is somebody who's had a lot of success in the NFL. That's a lot of offensive weapons for a team. The Giants have a good offense. They have a lot of skill players. They need to figure out the offensive line. That's been a challenge, but that's one of the reasons why to keep Jones on the move, move him outside the pocket, get him on the move to try to mitigate against that offensive line. So going against the Falcons, who that allowed 62 rushing yards to Jalen Hurts in week 1. They've given up to the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks so far this season. Greeny, do you know that Daniel Jones is right now the 4th best quarterback in fantasy?
Huh.
The 4th best quarterback in fantasy is Daniel Jones. So he's got more fantasy points than Dak Prescott.
This is why I love having you, because I learned so much from you, because it's not in my blood the way it is. Again, it's Matthew Berry, who's the man who invented fantasy. I want to ask you about Derek Carr.
Yeah.
He has played with the Raiders. He has played 2 of the best defenses in the sport so far, the Ravens and the Steelers. He's thrown for he's averaging over 400 yards passing per game, and he's thrown 4 touchdowns. Do you like him this weekend against Miami?
I don't, but I do think the narrative on Derek Carr needs to change. Again, if we're just talking fantasy here, in the past 6 games that he's played, going back to 4 games last year, 4 full games that he played last year, the first 2 this year, as you mentioned, Greeny, he's never finished worse than QB 12. He's currently QB 8 on the season in total points. He leads the NFL in passing yards. And so I think there's so much. The narrative on Derek Carr needs to change. I think John Gruden got a lot of grief when John was saying that he thought Derek Carr was a franchise quarterback, and that was one of the reasons why he wanted to take the Raiders job, is because he believed in Derek Carr, and a lot of people sort of scoffed and said, yeah, you're just saying that because of the money, blah, blah, blah. Look, Derek Carr is putting the money where, John's mouth is. Mm-hmm. He has been nothing short of fantastic. Fantasy-wise, however, I am concerned about this matchup against Miami. We know the Miami defense is really good. They're top 10 so far this year in terms of yards and completion rate on deep passes. 46% of Derek Carr's fantasy points this year have come on deep passes. You saw the big pass to Henry Ruggs last week, of course, right?
Yeah.
Here's the other thing. Miami blitzes a lot. They blitz at the 4th highest rate in the NFL. Well, if you look at what Carr does against the blitz, he is 27th in completion percentage against the blitz. He has not handled the blitz particularly well so far this year. Again, we're dealing with small sample size here, but I'm a believer in that Miami defense. And with Jacoby Brissett under center for the Dolphins, I think this is a slow-paced game. I think they try to run the ball. I think they try to slow the game down. And so given that Carr is not going to be able to throw deep as well as he has in the first 2 games, I'm outside my top 10 this week. And you're like, Derek Carr outside your top 10, and like, well, but that's where he belongs. So it's one of those things where you have to like convince people, like, guys, you don't realize this, but Derek Carr's actually really good. But I don't love him this week. It's a weird thing that I had to do in the column this week. Well, I have to explain, yes, I promise you he's good, but by the way, I don't like him this week.
There's also a big difference between his being really good and his being the right fantasy play, which
Correct.
I totally get. And those are things that I have to learn to divorce from each other in my own mind. Very quick, because I'm running out of time. I told you the first week I have Ezekiel Elliott as the running back on my team. All of a sudden, Tony Pollard has become the feature back in the Dallas offense, to my dismay. Is Ezekiel Elliott going to bounce back big Monday night against Philly?
I don't think he's going to bounce back big. Look, Tony Pollard's a thing. There's no question about it. But look, Zeke's still playing the majority of the snaps. He's still going to get the more touches. The fact is, to your point, Tony Pollard has been productive. He's better, and they've used him more in the passing game. Like, he's going to be a thing. I have Zeke Elliott ranked 15th this week. Oh. So he makes right, which is not what you drafted him to be a top 5 running back. You and your son did, right? But like he still had 17.7 fantasy points last week. You know, like if you didn't know Tony Pollard existed and you're just like, and you woke up on Monday morning, you're like, oh, I got 17.7 out of Zeke. Great. Like, you know, like he's still the lead running back of one of the best offenses in football, running behind a good offensive line. Is he going to be as great as you hoped he would be when you drafted him? He's not, because again, Tony Pollard's going to be a thing, but I do think there's still a lot of value in Zeke. However, Eagles, really good defensive front. I do have lower expectations for Zeke this week. Again, he's number 15, which is still startable, but obviously not the top 5 guy you drafted.
No, we took him 8th overall, and I will tell you, I have not felt very good about it ever since. Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.